Hey, welcome back to part 5 of this series. So in between the last one, I wanted to flesh this out a little bit. So I've added more options that were in QuickBooks. So we can see here, I've missed a few out. For example, I've not put payroll or taxes or mileage or these two, but I've put all the rest in. Where are we? And I've also added all the icons in there, so I found quite a few, still using that same Iconify icon set that we chose in the last one. The other thing as well, I did actually find a proper bell icon in the end. It was under alarm, I think. So yeah, again, these are just using the same Iconify icon sets. If you want to reproduce this, I'll put the names of all of the different icons in the description so that you can just copy them and use them in your own app if that's what you want to do, if you're following along. So one thing I wanted to mention is that when we disappear if you just look very closely, if you look, the icons actually do not disappear immediately. Okay, they kind of, everything else goes away, but the icons kind of linger a little bit. You can barely see them because they're in very light grey and white. Okay, but the reason for that is in here we can, we need to select the icon, the Iconify. The reason being is we've got like a transition effect, but let's just set that to 0, and that should make that little issue go away. Yeah, there we go. It's just transitioning away. Right, okay, so we've kind of got our Navigator built out here. We've got everything that we need in terms of how QuickBooks works. Now let's look at actually how we're going to flush that out, how we're going to actually make that work in our app, how we're going to make, when you click an option here, how we're going to make it so that the right option is displayed in our main container. Okay, and the way that we're going to do this is we're going to use a method that's been dubbed clean URLs. And that's not by me, it's by a fairly prominent guy in the community called Eli Beachy. And I saw this one day when I was developing my own app and struggling with the navigation within my own app, and I saw this and I just thought that's the answer, and I implemented it and it works perfectly. So there's no reason why I wouldn't do the same in here. Okay, so the way this is going to work, as you would expect with QuickBooks, you select it and you get a different, the page doesn't refresh or anything like that, it's actually quite slow. But the page doesn't refresh, just this section refreshes. Okay, and that's what we're going to do with here. So if you imagine that all of this is like one container for whatever option that you select. So in other words, we've got this, which is a header container, and then we've got a main page container. We have back in here, so we've got a main container, then we've got a header container, and then at the same level as the header container we need another container which will contain, I'm using the word contain a lot, which will hold all of the rest of the content. Okay, and then as you select it, we then need to swap out what is displayed in each one, and we can use clean URLs to do that. And let's just go back and do something like that. So let's go to our containers and let's just drop the group in there. And what we will do is let's set the layout, and we're just going to do, we need to set it so if you can imagine that this is all, as in QuickBooks, everything's stacked on one another. So you got a header there, and then this, and then that, and the same with the sales, with the customers, you know, everything's stacked on top of each other. So that's how we're going to do it here. So therefore it's going to be a column layout. Okay, and by the way, this is a new thing in Bubble at the time recording, this container alignment. We didn't have that before. I've just seen, actually, I'm recording this in early August, and I've just seen the new community update from Josh at Bubble, and the number of new features that they're rolling out at the moment is pretty incredible, especially around performance and the layouts, the things that you can do. It's just, Bubble is just going to be incredible. It's incredible now, but it's just going to be unbelievable going forward. So we're going to have a fixed width, and I'm going to make this, let's say, minimum width. We won't have it as a fixed width. we will have it 240 will be our minimum, and I think that's what we did up here with our header. Let me check that. No, we made that 100%. We won't mess around with that. I don't want to break anything at this point. So basically, when you do that, when you don't make it fixed width, it means that it's never going to get any smaller than 240, but the maximum width is going to be infinite. In other words, it's going to fit that. If we have it as a fixed width of 100%, it will do effectively the same thing, but what we're doing with the min width, it will stop being responsive at a certain point. So if you want it to be static and make sure that it never shrinks smaller than that, then no matter how small a screen gets, then you can do that. So we're saying once you get to a really small mobile phone, we don't want it shrinking any more than that. We can change that in the future as we start looking more responsive. Then we can do that, but we're sort of just trying to get it so it fulfills basic responsive requirements. The minimum height, we are going to make that as a fixed height. I'm going to make it 100%, so it's only ever going to be as high as the page. Again, all of these are up for change, but we're just trying to set that. So this container is going to be our content container, so let's just give that a name, and we can just call that content CTR, and everything else is going to live in this. Okay, so the rest of our app effectively is going to live within that group. Okay, so if we have a look, let's say for example our dashboard, so we'll need something for dashboard, something for banking, something for sales. So let's just focus on these three at the minute. So let's say that I'm going to create another group and put it into this group. Okay, and this one is also going to be, this is going to be a group. We're going to call this dashboard, and this is going to be a column. Again, we're going to stack it on top of each other, and this time what we're going to do is we're going to say yes, it is fixed width and a fixed height of 100% of whatever the container is. So what we're saying there is that whatever the container is, which is our content container, always make it so that it's 100% width and height. Okay, and that's our dashboard. Now what I'm going to do on here is select the dashboard, select the dashboard group within the content container, and let's just drop a text in there. Okay, now what we'll do within the content container itself, so that everything adheres to it, is we will put some I've selected dashboard. Into the content container we'll put some padding all the way around, so we'll just say 10. Now if we're doing QuickBooks Pixel Perfect, then that doesn't seem to like padding, which is, I don't want to criticize anybody, but to me it's not great design. You should always have some padding around things, give people some space to make it more easier on the eye. And so what I will do then is I will, in fact, let's make it a little bit bigger at the top and the bottom. Content container, in fact, let's make it 15 all the way around. Okay, and what we can do there then is let's just call this text header dashboard, or let's say title. I don't just want to call it title because it is going on the page, and for now anyway, and each one's got to be unique, otherwise we don't know what we're looking at. So that's going to be dashboard. Okay, let's style that with our subheader left, which we're then going to need to remove that style, and we're going to need to change it to make it a little bit bigger. So let's go for 24, that'll do for us. We'll just leave everything as it is for now, there's no point in playing around with that. We'll make it bolder, let's say 700. Okay, that'll do for now. Okay, so if you can imagine that this, what's going to happen is this content container is there, and we've got a group for dashboards. So we're going to copy the dashboard, then I'm going to hide it, select the content container, and then I'm just going to paste that in. Okay, so we've got a dashboard copy. So I'll change the name of that to, this one is going to be banking, G banking. Okay, and again we're going to change that, so that's title banking, we then say banking in there, and I'm going to hide that one as well, go back to our content container and then paste the same thing in again. Okay, and this time dashboard 2 is there, it's actually put it in between our two, we'll deal with that in a second, but let's just dashboard 2 is going to be, I think it was sales for that one, and title sales, and I'm going to call it sales. Okay, so right, okay, so at the moment we've got sales as a middle one. The way that we can do that is we just simply go into layout and we just say make as next. Okay, and then that pushes that one down there. Okay, so the idea then is whichever option is selected, whether it's a dashboard, banking, or set out any of the others, is that only that particular group that represents it within the content container gets displayed, and that's how our single page app is working. Now, one of the things I'll say is the way that we're going to do this moving forward is that we're not going to put all of our content inside of the group. Okay, we're going to be using reusables for that to more componentize our system, so that we're not working on one page all of the time and having to get things out of the way. We'll be working in individual component blocks for each section. Okay, but we'll come to that. The first thing to do is to just understand what this is doing. So on page load, none of these are going to actually be visible. Okay, they're not visible, and we need to collapse them when they're hidden. We won't worry too much about that for the time being. So let's have a look at the banking. Again, it's not visible on page load, and it's going to collapse when it's hidden. And the same with our sales, it's not available on page load, and we're going to collapse it when it's hidden. Okay, so banking, sales, there we go. So like I say, when our dashboard is shown, we'll get that. Right, so how do we actually know which option is selected? Okay, and that's where our URLs, our clean URLs, come into this, because what's going to happen is when they click on an option in here, it's actually going to go and send a URL and navigate to the same page, but send something in the URL that's going to tell it which option was selected. Now, it's important to note in Bubble is that this is a single page app. We're not going to call all the pages, okay? We're just calling itself, and Bubble knows that you're calling the same page and doesn't perform a refresh on the page, okay? The only thing it does that's kind of repetitive is in our workflow we do have a page is loaded event, okay? So this gets called when the page is loaded, so it will get called every single time that we then call the same page with a different URL. And then that's when we can take the action of what we're going to hide, what we're going to show, dependent on which URL is sent. Okay, so let's say, for example, that we're going to select the dashboard. I mean, we have to have a default option. We want one that's open by default, which will probably be our dashboard, but we still don't want to display it by default. We want the system to handle that. So what we can do, for example, if they click the option, this group, sorry, it's not selected it, this nav option, and that will trigger whether they click on the icon or not. Again, we need to do our thing that we did earlier with our icon, is to make it clickable, and then we need to set up a different selection for that. But let's say, for example, on our group, so when they click the group, they then start edit workflow on that one. And again, just like we did last time, we're going to start with a custom event. So we're going to create a custom event, and we're going to turn that into green so that I know it is a custom event, and we're just going to call that nav select. Okay, and what we can do there is actually add a parameter so that we know which option was selected. And what we can do there is point to, do you remember all our options, all our Navigator options are in an option set. So what we can do is we'll call that option. We can say option selected, and then we can actually make that as a nav option so that we're not having to deal with text and things like this. We just can do that. Okay, it's not a list and it's not optional. They have to send that in. Okay, so in our when gnav option is clicked, then what we do, we don't put any logic, again, don't put any logic on the actual nav, the nav, on the actual UI event. But what we do is we say trigger a custom event, and we say that we're going to select nav select, and then it wants to know the option that's selected. And all that we have to do then is to say current, because we don't know any of this, that's their static, but what we can do is to say current cells nav option, because what the UI does, the UI event does, it has context of where you've selected it from, and the context, because it's in a group inside of a repeating group, we get access to the current cells nav option. So if you select dashboard, it knows to send dashboard through. If it's sales, it knows to send sales through. Okay, and therefore at this point our nav select then knows which option it needs to deal with. Okay, so let's just deal with our other thing, which is our Iconify. So we're going to say an Iconify is clicked, and the element is going to be, it's an IC nav option. And again, we're not going to put any logic, we're just going to select we're just going to trigger the custom event, which is nav select. Nav select, and again, because the Iconify actually lives within a group, it doesn't have any knowledge of the repeating group, but it does have access to the group, which has been fed through the option from the repeating group cell. This time we select the parent group's nav option, which is exactly the same thing as current cells. When we trigger it from here, current cells nav option. Okay, so now we've done that, just what I will do is I will add my into there so that I can then leave these behind, so to speak, and just go and have a look at my custom events. What also I can do sometimes is, rather than going to what is to actually set these into, I usually give the page load a different color because then it just makes it stand out, so I give it brown color. But what I can do there is just add it into another workflow folder, and I just usually just call these UI events, and so I can look at the UI events without looking at everything else as well. So I just do the same thing here. Again, it's up to you. I'm just saying you the way that I found is the best way to actually organize things. Okay, and therefore I don't have to look at everything. I can look at my custom, and I can look at the UI events. My page loaded is a UI event, but it's a kind of a different type of UI event. Okay, so with navigation select, we know which option has been selected by the user. So how do we, so what we want to do, let's just give you an example. So I've got, let's say that my app is just called app, okay, and then I want to send in there what I want to display. So I could just say dashboard as an example. Okay, and what I'm going to do then, that's a parameter that I'm sending in, that's a URI. So what I want to do is that when I tell the page to not reload itself but call itself again, and then Bubble knows not to reload it, is that then when it does reload, it knows that this is what it wants to see. Okay, if I want to see sales, I will get this, for example. Yeah, so we can then work our system around this type of navigation. Okay, and So the best way to deal with that then, because we're on an option set and each option set can call its URL, as we did with icons, the best way to do that is to add it into our option set. So in our option set, we just create a new attribute and we call this one URL. And that is going to be text. And for dashboard, we can set the URL and we're just going to say dashboard. And banking is going to be banking, and there's a good chance that these will get changed as you go through, because you're going to have more options. You might have a sub path as well, so that you can say, well, it's banking but it's this within banking or something like that. So it's just a case of organizing it, but for now we're just going to deal with our top level navigation options. I'll just call those customers, cash flow. Right, we'll leave that for that now, as long as we've got our first few that's on there. If we actually have a look at QuickBooks, we can see that they're actually doing the same thing. So they've got their basic domain /app/customers, and if you click on, say, marketing, you can see that it actually goes to a different URL, but the actual page doesn't refresh. It just calls itself. It's sort of navigating within itself, and that's what Bubble does as well. So it's a similar sort of thing to what we see in there. So when you click dashboard, we're going to basically send it to the same page, but we're going to tag this URL bit onto the end. So the way we're going to do that is in our workflow, with our nav select event, is we're going to add an action and we go to navigation and we say go to page, and the destination is going to be the same page, which is our app page. And the data to send is it's just a piece of text that we're going to send it in. And the way that we do that with Bubble is we look for an option that's called arbitrary text. So where are we now? It should be in, there we go, arbitrary text. Okay, and it says, okay, what arbitrary text do you want to send? Now this has got to be dynamic, because it's coming from the, if you imagine, do you remember we set up a parameter here which gets past the option that has been selected? So we need to sort of grab that out of there. So the way that we do that in arbitrary text is insert dynamic data, and our parameter that the UI event sent in, which is the option that's been selected, is stored in our option selected parameter, and then we just say the URL, which is the attribute that we just set up then. Okay, so that's all that we need to do really, and then that will send us the correct URL. Okay, so if we just test it, we won't do anything else at this point, but let's just test it. So we'll refresh this. Okay, so let's say we click banking. Can you see what's happened there? It's added this onto the end of the URL for the app. Same with sales, same with customers and leads, and same with Cashflow. We haven't actually had any of those in yet, which will show up there. But the point is now is that we're sending it the option, the URL that's attached to the option that we've selected. Okay, and then once the page loads, we can use the page loaded event to actually make a decision on what has been passed in there. So we've done one side of it, and you can see how simple that was. Now we need to do the other side of it, which is to actually read that value and make a decision based on it. So we're going to use Bubble's reactive way of working. So, and it's always the best way to do it. You don't try and do everything yourself. Don't try and force Bubble to do things. The best way to do it is just to set it up so that your app is very reactive. And custom states are key to this. So let's just have a look at our container that we set up. Let's just make that as a content container. So let's have a look at our dashboard, for example. Okay, so what do we want to happen? So we want the dashboard group to appear when the URL that we get along at the top is dashboard. So the way to do that is to set up a conditional. So what we're going to do is define a condition, and then what we're going to do is to say, well, we're going to check on a custom state, and we're going to say when this custom state is the dashboard, then we can make this visible, because if you remember, by default all of the groups of all of the different options are going to not be visible on page load. So we need to make a decision when they're going to be visible. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to set up a custom state. So let's click on the app. Okay, and let's create a custom state, and let's say that this is, we'll call this option selected, again starting with the underscore and then the camel case, and this one is going to be the nav option. So in other words, we're going to know which option has been selected, so from the actual option set. Okay, and we won't set a default value at the minute, but obviously we can do that. So in here, what we'll do then is to say the app, and we'll say option selected. Okay, and then what we can do then is to say is dashboard. Okay, and then we just say that this element is visible, yes. Right, so therefore, if you imagine in our workflow, we then just need to do the job of determining what this is, this option selected. Okay, but what we'll do for now is we will just copy that condition and pop it into our other option groups. Paste. This one is going to be when it's banking, and then into sales, paste that condition, and when it's sales. Okay, so what we need to do then is when our page is loaded event, which, like I say, when you call the same page, Bubble doesn't refresh the page, so all of your custom states are still intact. All of your elements, the state of the page is exactly the same. The only thing it does is call this page loaded event. Okay, so the way that we can read the URL that's been passed in is effectively, and this is where clean URLs really come into their own, and the methodology that, like I say, is at mine. It was certainly dubbed by Eli Beachy, and the way that he does this is to actually, we're going to set the state, so we can set a state here. And so let's say that we've got the app and we just created our option selected. Now obviously the URL is just a text, it's just a piece of text. What we want back to set into this custom state is the actual option. So what we're going to do first of all then is we're going to say, it's not going to be any of these static ones, we're going to actually say get an option. Okay, and the option that we're going to get is, we're going to say all options. Okay, which is not good because we need to get the one, but what we're going to do is we're going to set a filter. Okay, and we're going to add a constraint to the filter. So what we're going to do there is to say we're only looking for the option whose URL is the one that's been passed into the page. So what we can do there is to say this nav option, which we're referring to the option that it's passing through as it's filtering, URL, okay, is, okay, and then what we need to do is to grab the URL from the page, and Bubble gives us a very nice option, which is get data from page URL. Okay, it's not this URL, it's get data from page URL. Okay, and what we actually want is path segments as a list. Now what path segments as a list does is, each, if you imagine on a URL you've got dash, then something, then dash, then something. Okay, and then what it does is it parses the URL of the page and passes each one of those into a list, so you get a list of them. Now the way that this works, let's just have a look at our Bubble app with this one here, is the app bit, which is the name of the page, is the very first one. Okay, so we're not really interested in looking at the first item, that when we pass it as the segments into a list, that's item 1. We're not really interested in that. What we're interested in this, which is item 2, that's what we need to read off there. Okay, so we say path segments as a list, so that's going to put the URL breakdown by slash into a list. Okay, and we're just going to close that, and then when we've got that, what we can do there is to say item number 2. Okay, so let's just go through this again, because I know it can sort of be a little bit, we then need to say the first item as well there. So just to make sure that we get there's only one item. Each URL is going to be unique, so there's only one item that's going to meet that filter. So what we're doing there is we're saying we want to return all of our nav options, okay, but we're going to filter that list, and we're going to say this nav options URL, because the URL is an attribute that actually contains the URL, and we're going to say get data from the page URL, okay. And within that, we then set the option, the type of being a path segment as a list, which breaks each segment of the URL from app onwards as a separate item and returns it as text. And we only need item number 2, which, as I explained, is this bit here. That's part 1, which is the name of the page. That's reserved by Bubble. If we ever needed to get the page, that'd be handy there, but we're a single page app, so we know what the page is. We just need that. Okay, and then so we get item number 2 of that list, the list of the segments, and then from what it returns, then we just get the first item, because we only want to return one option from that filtered list into this. Okay, so that gets us the option that we need and stores it into this custom state. Now, because we've done everything else in our design and we've operated reactively using conditionals, we don't need to do anything else. It's just that one action step that we need to take. So I think we should give that a whirl. So let's just see. So you can see, actually, I just refreshed it and it's automatically gone to dashboard, but let's clear that URL out. Okay, so we should get nothing at the minute. So let's go to banking. There we go. So we get banking, and that's what it gets us. Sales, dashboard. Perfect. We won't get anything with these because we haven't got groups for anything other than the sales. But that's how clean URLs work. And you can see it just took us 2 action steps to do that. One at the point of selecting the option, and then the other part at the point of when the page not reloads but calls itself to read the URL that it's being called with, to determine what's going to happen in our container, what option is going to be used. And that way we can very cleanly control what is going on. And like I say, if QuickBooks does exactly the same thing. QuickBooks actually always works on just one level of, it's actually very similar, isn't it? It's got the app first. It works very cleanly with just one level of URL. So if whatever you select, whatever option you go, let me select something that's going to have a couple of things. Expenses, you select suppliers, you just get vendors. Projects, no, I need something that's got a sub menu. Okay, customers, you go to invoices, you get invoices, and it's working in exactly the same way. The difference being, of course, is that they needed a team of developers and software engineers to work with some complicated front-end framework. We just used it in 2 action steps with no code in a Bubble app. So that's why Bubble is so amazing. Okay, so listen, we've done clean URLs in this now, so I think we'll leave that there. What I'm going to do as well is, I mentioned previously about our navigation and how I like to have it displayed differently so that you can have a shortened version of this. Now, I have been going on about QuickBooks and the way it works now, it's got a lack of it. What I've realised is I actually put this into accountant mode. So it does have a version of the menus, the navigation menu, where it does have icons and it does have a shorter version. I don't really like the way it works, so I don't think we're going to implement that perfectly as that is. But yeah, there is a version of that, and we're going to look at that again. But what I'm going to do is, I don't want to start playing around with the navigation, being all fancy with navigation in a main part of this tutorial, because I want to start to get into a little bit more the meat and gravy of what we need to do to build out a QuickBooks clone. But I'm going to put like a bonus video so that we can do that. So if you want to follow along, that's great. But if you're quite happy for just the navigation to work as it does, then you can just move on to part 6. If not, watch the bonus, the part 5 bonus that I'm going to put up as well. So listen, thanks for watching again. Really appreciate your time. I know this is going on a long time, but we're building out a major application here. But thanks for your time. Take it easy, and I'll see you in the next one.